Not a question, it's just a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I intend that you will throw some light about it. Uh, you stated about the Hindutva kind of project and what you have stated. Is it something similar conclusions what Irfan Ahmed states about Jamaat Islami in his limits of Islamism? Is it similar kind of conclusion that you have reached in your new piece on Hindutva also?
Okay. Any other question? Then I'll club a few questions and then I'll respond. Okay. See, what Irfan is saying, Irfan is analyzing he's a very close friend of mine. So he is analyzing a trajectory of a political party. Not political party, is a pressure group led to formation of a political party later on. And his argument is that because it was constituted in the realm of politics, which describe itself as democratic, so the basic contour which defined Jamaat Islami at one point of time also changes. That was Irfan's argument. But my argument is very different. My argument is this document called Constitution. First of all, it was given to political parties at a very interesting moment when idea of India was not fully conceptualized. We certainly had different imagination of India in 1947, but the first general election of 1952 was very crucial. So when this constitution was given to the people, to the political parties who were new and who did not have they had their own imagination of India and the ideal kind of world which they wanted to constitute. But when this document came to them, they decided to evolve their own interpretation of this document. And therefore, two things happened. First, a language of constitutionalism evolved. So, because they accepted to participate in election, they design their ideologies according to the language which was written in the constitution. So, for example, Janasangh in 1950s would also uh, talk about socialism in some ways, or for example, the left or the communist parties, there's a famous 1951 Communist Party resolution, which also says that we are highly uncomfortable with this constitution. But at the same time, we realize that it has got something called universal adult franchise, which would give some kind of a right to vote to everyone. So therefore, they are critical of it. And remember, JP came out with a book called A Plea for Reconstruction of Indian Polity. The book was published in 1959, in which JP was very critical of the constitution. So what is my point? My point is that when constitution was presented to different political parties, they did to design their political strategies. Second, they also evolved their own different mode of constitutionalism, their own interpretation of constitutionalism. And that somehow, on the one hand, that provided legitimacy to the constitution. But at the same time, that also somehow allow every political group to come out with their own interpretation of the constitutionalism. Hindutva constitutionalism is something which actually grew up from this larger framework. Unfortunately, if you look at the literature which that the constitution, the placing of constitution in the political discourse, has not given adequate intellectual attention. And this is something which we pay close attention to. This is basically this is very different from Irfan's argument.
Okay.
Yeah, there is some comment in the chat box.
Not a question.
Yeah.
Just an analogy. As you were speaking about the Babri Masjid kind of case and the dialogue between BHP and others.
Mm.
Because I come from Kashmir, and now a dialogue, particularly between the separatists, those who are asking for secession, and the Indian state, has been going on since 47, and now it has reached to a point where the politics of dialogue is stated that the dialogue has delegitimized. Now, no militant organization or separatist groups wants to talk with the Indian state because they state that just the Indian state intends to engage us in an unending process of dialogue where at the end they will not give you anything. They will not bring down the militarization. They will not bring down the human rights violations. The other perpetuators will not be brought to the book. So that's why, in a certain sense, now the dialogue as an institution has got retrograded or so much degraded in our Kashmiri lexicon that nobody wants to initiate it or engage in any sense with the state. So can it be stated that an impasse has been reached in certain situations? Is there some other analogy like you stated about Babri Masjid and now the dialogue in the case of Kashmir also delegitimized? So can we draw parallels or something like that, that both the Indian state doesn't want it or the Kashmiris, uh, for the Kashmiris it has again delegitimized? So just a thought
Yeah,
about it.
Mushtaq, that's a wonderful question. Thank you very much for making this dialogue so interesting. And let me just clarify my position. I am not here to answer here. My self-perception in this dialogic situation is simply this, that we all are participating in a dialogue which again, the 5 points which I underline, in which we agree, we have an issue, etc., and we are not bothered about the success and failure. Rather, we want to just the idea is to have an informed sort of conversation that can be converted into a dialogic mode. And this is so that's why whatsoever I am, my responses are not answers. My responses are basically to guide the process, because somehow my role is as a moderator is recognized by the structure in which we are talking to each other. Okay, if this is the case, then politics of dialogue. First of all, Babri Masjid is not, is not a closed case. Babri Masjid issue is not, has found a new political meaning, and we need to recognize those meanings. This is something which I would like to talk about later. But coming back to the specific issue which you raised about Kashmir, no, there was, the point where I just made. Dialogue was also a theater in case of Kashmir. So the separatist state dialogue was seen by, not merely by the people of Kashmir, it was seen by the mainland India, it was seen by the world outside. And it was somehow, whenever you find it difficult to make a case, you would say that I'm going to constitute a committee, and that committee would tell us how to do dialogue. So that institutionalization of dialogue is something which was used by the separatists as well as the state for a long time. The separatists would say that we need a committee. The state said we are constituting a committee. Then the committee would is made. They travel, they collect information, they come out certain reports, and then the report were discussed, etc. There is a history of that, but that is something which I call theater of dialogue. Yeah. So that is one thing. But if we want to make if we want to unpack this politics of committee making and the theater of dialogue, we have to be comparative. We have to adopt a comparative approach. What about Nagaland? The dialogue Indian state is having with Naga separatist group are entirely different. Why? Because the nature of the representation of dialogue in that case is different. In case of Kashmir, remember, Kashmir is a buffer state. Kashmir has got a historical relationship with Pakistan. Kashmir has got is an international UN sort of recognition at some point of time. Therefore, Indian state would like to do a different kind of activity with regard to dialogue there. That is a different politics of dialogue. But when it comes to Nagaland, Indian state does not find it difficult to accept the first phrase that we are accepting that this is a dialogue between Indian state, sovereign Indian state, and Nagalim, not Nagaland. Look at the number of different dialogue which happened with Naga separatist groups. You may find not Nagaland, the name of the territory is changed. It means that the theater of dialogue, the politics of dialogue is also highly diversified. And it would be it would be highly misleading to think that only one kind of politics, only one interpretation of the politics of dialogue is possible. Okay, so but I'll come to the Babri Masjid point later. Thank you very much for this question. Yeah, is there any other question? Otherwise, I'll.
Dr. Ahmed, I want to ask one thing. I've been contemplating on this for pretty long time, and since you
have to continue with dialogue, and remember when Babri Masjid was demolished on 6th of December 1992, the process of dialogue was also going on. So the point I'm trying to make is that the politics of dialogue is something which always relies on its endurance. In good thing, in a positive sense, it will become a reference point for future negotiations or future resolves. In a negative sense, it will somehow used to stabilize or to legitimize the presence of state as the ultimate authority, a governing authority in a society. So I stop here. So if you have a few comments or questions, I would be happy to answer.
Dr. Hilal, just a question related to Babri Masjid. How correct is this thing that what Maulana Wahiduddin Khan and also Arif Muhammad Khan states related to Babri Masjid think that there was a certain kind of a negotiation between Ali Mia and Rajiv Gandhi because its background was the Shah Banu kind of case in which there was a ulama kind of movement to overturn the Supreme Court decision about triple talaq. So how much was that kind of background really basically the background of Shah Banu case that became a prelude for opening up the Babri Masjid gates and renewing this Babri Masjid dispute once again, because again Rajiv Gandhi had to appease to a large, huge electorate. So how this criticism of Arif Muhammad Khan or Maulana Wahiduddin Khan, how much relevant is it according to you?
Yeah, quickly. You are right, because Ali Mia himself, in his autobiography, Ali Mia Nadwi wrote a very interesting 6-volume autobiography. It's called Karwan is Zindagi. Yeah, in which he said that he was hoping that Rajiv Gandhi would listen to him again like Shah Banu. So, the presence of ulama or the religious elite in politics somehow got legitimacy during the time of Shah Banu. And it was very unfortunate, by the way, because somehow what Rajiv Gandhi did, and there is a lot of things which have been written later on. What Rajiv Gandhi did, he also promotes some kind of a rightist politics of Hindutva kind. And this is not Rajiv Gandhi. This process actually started in 84. In 1984, when first Rath Yatra led by VHP, Indira Gandhi was supposed to inaugurate that. So therefore, the changed policy of Congress in post 1980 is something which is very significant. It relied heavily on the religious issues, whether, and you know, if you look at the way in which Punjab crisis was dealt, the way in which Shah Banu was dealt, and the way in which Babri Masjid Ram Temple issue is dealt by the Congress, it shows a pattern. And in this pattern, fundamentalism of different kind is always legitimized in order to get some kind of a justification of to present itself as the authority over the conflict, the state's presence as a conflict managing agency and things like that. So you are right, I agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you.